having the audacity to act high and mighty over a mere $500 for rent. Want to try and stop paying? The words that were uttered, and why I'm preparing to move out, you ask? The reason traces back to a few hours ago when my mother-in-law and I had a dispute over the living expenses. Justin is advancing to junior high school and our expenses are increasing, and I heard my sister-in-law has taken up additional part-time jobs. Could you possibly help with contributing a portion of the rent? However, my mother-in-law didn't take my job seriously. She even went as far as to belittle it, saying drawing pictures was merely some sort of playing around. If you don't want to pay, you might as well leave the house. That was the moment I had been waiting for. Finally, the time had come. I quietly stood up, said nothing, and walked to my room. Later, my sister-in-law came in and taunted, "If you're so smart, why not stop the payments then? If that's what they want, I can do that. Sure, I'll stop." And with that, I left the house with a smile. I vowed to clear the resentment of the past 13 years. My name is Gina Manning. At 42, I work from home as a freelance designer. I currently live with my in-laws, have a 13-year-old son, and my husband Robert is stationed abroad. We met in college. Although we were classmates in university and had attended the same high school, we hardly interacted or conversed until we joined the same club in university. The reason was that I had been a student in an integrated course that spans from middle to high school for 6 years, while Robert had joined a regular course upon entering high school. While I was always in A class, Robert was in B class or lower, so we had little to no contact. However, we ended up at the same university and club by chance, and this was the beginning of a friendship. Robert and I got along well, and at 28, we decided to get married. Our life together was modest but peaceful and enjoyable, until suddenly our fate took a different turn. At 29, a year after our marriage, we began living with my in-laws. Reason was due to my father-in-law falling ill and no longer being able to work, requiring care. My mother-in-law was always devoted to household chores, and it seems my sister-in-law, Sarah, was supporting herself with part-time jobs. At that time, Robert earnestly asked for my support, kneeling. "I can't handle this alone. I know it's a burden to you, but please, I need your help." I couldn't refuse such a request. When he proposed, his family warmly welcomed me, and I never felt uncomfortable. Besides, my parents have long passed away. Since my work was based from home and I would be able to continue doing so, I decided to move in with my in-laws. Only later would I realize that this decision was a big mistake. Living with my in-laws turned my daily life into a series of hardships. Robert was living together with us for a few months when suddenly the following conversation came up. "I'm sorry. I've been assigned a long-term business trip. I'll be joining a construction project overseas as an assistant supervisor. I'll return to the US occasionally, but it's unclear when the project will be completed. I'm truly sorry." I was genuinely surprised by this news, but I had anticipated such a possibility before our marriage. Robert works for a company with global operations and had mentioned the possibility of an overseas assignment in his 30s. He had said that if he were assigned overseas, he would likely spend several years abroad. While agreeing to a relationship with marriage in mind and ultimately choosing to live together was not something Robert should apologize for, the timing was unfortunate. There was still a slight distance between me and my in-laws, and I was worried about how well things would go in Robert's absence. Yet, I had no choice but to move on. I made up my mind and saw Robert off, but in his absence, my in-laws finally decided to reveal their true, ugly nature. "Gina, please take care of this." As I was hanging the laundry after washing it, my sister-in-law threw her clothes into the washing machine and started it. It was just childish harassment, forcing me to dry the clothes outside in the cold. Okay, this was how my in-laws treated me. They all mistook me for a mere housekeeper and acted arrogantly. "Gina, since you've married into this family, It's only natural that you do these things, right? Why can't you handle such simple tasks? Oh, how I would have loved to see the faces of your parents. My mother-in-law said that, despite knowing that my parents had passed away early due to illness. Not long after, my father-in-law's health deteriorated due to excessive drinking, leading to him falling over and injuring his lower limbs, making him unable to move and thus needing care. And yet, he continued to make excessive remarks. Hey, the beer bottle is empty. Such a rude woman is nothing but trouble. A daughter-in-law should just hurry up and go to the liquor store to buy some beer. Why don't you show some consideration for me, who can't walk? He slammed the empty beer bottle on the table while yelling at me. This has become a daily routine. The face my in-laws showed me until now was all an act. From the beginning, they deceived us by putting on a good face during the marriage, only to use me as a convenient housekeeper. Robert was also a victim, deceived by them. While I thought of contacting Robert numerous times, my hands stopped as I was about to dial his number. Robert is currently abroad, engaged in important work. I ended up not being able to contact him due to mixed feelings of wanting to share my struggles and not wanting to be a bother. I believe that if I didn't react strongly to my in-laws' harassment, they would eventually get tired and stop. However, they were unexpectedly persistent and did not change their merciless attitude. When I served them food, it was criticized as tasteless. Leftovers were immediately thrown away, and I ended up having to clean up the mess. When I ironed clothes and a tiny wrinkle was left, I'd have to endure a lengthy and pointless scolding. After enduring this for a month, I couldn't take it anymore and with trembling hands decided to contact Robert. Robert, help. I'm at my limit. I can't bear the treatment from your mother and the others every day. Hearing my SOS, Robert was initially shaken but then regained his composure and replied, I understand. I didn't know you were going through such hardships. I can't continue my work like this. It might be difficult to return home immediately, but I'll consult my boss to see if there's a chance to return within a month. I'm sorry. Even though it was my idea to live together, but here I am at an overseas post. Just knowing that Robert was on my side lightened my heart a little. But even after revealing my situation to Robert, the harassment from my in-laws didn't stop. So, you cried to Robert? He contacted me and told us to stop the terrible treatment towards you. Really, making us out to be the bad guys? What an ungrateful woman. There was still a considerable amount of time before Robert would return. Nevertheless, Robert tried to help me by contacting his mother and pointing out various things. But this attempt provoked them even more. Scolded by her beloved son, my mother-in-law got offended, and unfortunately, her anger was directed at me. Did she think I wouldn't tell Robert about it? I can proudly assert that my anger and sadness are justified. I love Robert and want to care for his family as if they were my own. I chose to live with them with such feelings, not expecting the hardships that awaited. My mother-in-law constantly nags me, my sister-in-law keeps being mean to me, and my father-in-law uses coarse language, drinks alcohol despite being forbidden by doctors, and forces me to buy him alcohol and snacks. Besides, my in-laws seem to be misunderstanding something. Even I have a part-time job, it's pathetic that you just stay at home and rely on Robert. My sister-in-law blurted out to me. They are under the impression that I'm not working. Although remote work is gradually becoming recognized nowadays, my in-laws' conception of it is far from my actual situation. Typically, salaried workers doing remote work report their start of work and have regular online meetings. However, as a freelancer managing my own business, I work at my own pace, often taking breaks when I'm not feeling up to it and trying to maintain my mental health. This way of working is not at all uncommon, and a friend of mine who is a freelance writer also spends her days in a similar manner. However, it seems that my sister-in-law thinks I am just lazing around. She claims to be working part-time, but in reality, she only works 4 hours a week and heads straight home. She's not contributing to the household finances, and I've seen her receiving pocket money from her father. It's clear who should be more ashamed, but I've kept silent to avoid trouble. Despite such treatment, there's a reason I haven't left this place. I am pregnant. A month had passed since that call, and Robert had finally returned home. Upon his arrival, he gathered his mother and the others in the living room to talk, but they seemed not to take him seriously, letting the conversation slide as if nothing had happened. They probably anticipated that Robert would go abroad again. If they endured this period, the meddling Robert would leave and they would have their chance to exploit me freely again. To my in-laws, Robert seemed to be nothing more than a source of money or the bringer of a convenient daughter-in-law. Seeing my loved one being belittled hurt me, but I decided to remain silent for the time being. After being scolded by Robert, my sister-in-law grumbled with a displeased expression. And what about a husband who stays overseas, leaving his pregnant wife behind? After hearing that, Robert turned to me with a surprised look. Sorry I kept silent. I've been feeling unexplainably unwell since you left. I found out I'm pregnant just recently after getting examined at the hospital. I ran into your sister by chance when I was leaving the clinic in front of the station. I didn't want my in-laws to know about the pregnancy. While I was overjoyed about the pregnancy, revealing this situation would surely make Robert worry and possibly hasten his return plans. He had already been allowed to return unexpectedly. I couldn't further hinder his career by imposing more demands. I intended to keep quiet until Robert returned. But I didn't think I'd run into my sister-in-law. Seeing me leaving the clinic, my sister-in-law approached with a smirk, saying, "Congratulations. Since my brother is the eldest son, obviously he'll be the one to inherit the house. I'll make sure to tell this news to both Mom and Dad." By the end of the day, the fact that I was pregnant had reached my in-laws' ears. Nothing changed because of it. The days of being burdened with household chores continued as usual. Hearing this, Robert became even angrier, but until the day he left again, they showed no sign of remorse. I can't leave Gina in a place like this. Robert suggested that we move elsewhere. However, I carefully refused his proposal. I appreciate the offer and it's probably the best option, but I can't take this anymore. After all that, I don't just want to run away. I'm sorry for making you worried, but please bear with it a little longer. Robert opposed, of course, but my determination was unshakable. That feeling had taken root deep within me. After Robert returned to his work overseas, I decided to outwardly comply with my in-laws. When they learned that the baby was a boy, the grandparents, who had hoped for a male heir, became slightly kinder. But the insults towards me continued. My sister-in-law seemed displeased with the change. Just because she's pregnant, you shouldn't be too soft on her. Just let her carry the heavy things. While saying this, my sister-in-law pointed to a large box ordered online by my mother-in-law. However, my mother-in-law said with a gentle smile, "That child is indeed Robert's, right? He's a boy and an important heir, so it's fine for now. Once the baby is born, we'll have her do the chores again. Haha." Hearing this, my sister-in-law laughed contentedly. Truly a family with rotten cores. Despite feeling this way, I held a strong determination not to be defeated and successfully gave birth to a healthy baby boy after overcoming the pregnancy period. But without a moment's rest, busy days began, and in the blink of an eye, 13 years had passed. I was 42 years old, and my son, Justin, had just become a 13-year-old middle school student. Robert had been coming back to the US occasionally, but recently it was finally decided that he would return to the US for good after completing his assignment. At last, I decided to put into action the plan I had been cooking up for years. As I was preparing to leave the house by packing my things, I was approached from behind. Turning around, I saw my mother and sister-in-law still wearing their disdainful smiles, looking down on me. Out of nowhere, they uttered these words. "Having the audacity to act high and mighty over a mere $500 for rent. Want to try and refuse the payment?" Why they said this and why I am now preparing to leave the house trace back to a few hours earlier, when my mother-in-law and I had a disagreement over rent. Justin has started middle school, and our expenses have increased. I heard that Sarah also started working more part-time jobs. Could you help by contributing a portion of the rent? Justin is my son's name. Then my mother-in-law got angry, dismissing my concerns over such a trivial amount. Even though the rent is only $500 a month, you can't even pay that? How much of Robert's income are you trying to claim for yourself? Spending your days drying on the computer and playing, what a comfortable life you must lead. If you don't want to pay, then feel free to leave. This reaction was precisely what I was waiting for. In fact, I had been steering the situation to this outcome. Without reacting to my mother-in-law's provocation, I quietly stood up and walked to my room without saying a word. Over the past 13 years, I had gradually reduced my possessions so I could leave quickly when the time came. My belongings were already minimal, fitting easily into a large suitcase. In the midst of this, perhaps having heard from my mother-in-law, my sister-in-law appeared and provocatively said, "Then try and stop paying. If that's what they want, I can do that. Sure, I'll stop." With those words and a smile on my face, I left the house. I vowed to myself to settle the grievances accumulated over these 13 years. I headed to the short-stay apartment I had arranged in advance. I had discussed this plan with Justin beforehand. He came to the short-stay apartment without hesitation and started his homework without asking any questions, which made me laugh. Perhaps this adaptability was inherited from his father, Robert, who was accustomed to living abroad. With that thought, I moved on to my next action. As my sister-in-law provocatively suggested, I contacted each service provider to stop all payments for essential services, including electricity and water. Learning that the services would be unavailable from the next day, I quietly celebrated this small victory. Unknown to my in-laws, I had been covering all the utility expenses for the house. The contracts were in my name. Initially, Robert was paying those bills, but when he went abroad, we were suggested to change the contracts to the name of the person living in the house. Since I would be living there for an extended period of time and had my own income to cover the payments without any issue, I requested to have all the contracts transferred to my name. Thus, while they thought the cessation of rent payment was minor, they did not anticipate the discontinuation of electricity and water usage. They were under the illusion that all payments were being made by Robert, who was abroad. But when my sister-in-law explicitly challenged me to try to stop the payments, I complied with her request and halted all payments. I looked forward to the next day. With that thought, I went to bed and fell into a deep, restful sleep, feeling liberated. I couldn't recall the last time I had such a peaceful rest throughout the long 13 years, sleeping through the night without awakening. The next morning, after sending Justin to school, I was working from home when, as expected, I received a call from my mother-in-law. "What's going on? Both electricity and water have been cut off. You told Robert again, didn't you? Harassing us with such a cowardly method. Aren't you ashamed?" In contrast to her shouting, I responded calmly. "Didn't you say it yourselves to try and stop the payments? Were you even aware that I was the one covering all the utility bills for the house? I was just following your instructions, so why should I be blamed?" This left my mother-in-law speechless. She must not have imagined that all the payments were under my name. Of course, the cessation wasn't limited to just electricity and water, but included other services as well. I had already contacted the gas company, and since I was no longer using the residence, I requested that they bill the in-laws living there for the rent. They should be receiving a call from the real estate agent soon. Then, over the phone, I heard my father-in-law's panicked voice. "The real estate agent contacted us about the next rent payment. Now we have to deal with the rent issue too. On top of the electricity and water being cut off, has Robert done something else?" Hearing my father-in-law's agitation made me smile involuntarily. Well, yes, everyone had belittled my job as just playing around drawing. After a moment of silence, my mother-in-law finally spoke. Even if you were the one making all the payments, that must have been Robert's salary. No? Humph, you're not in any position to talk. Really, troublesome women are such a bother. Her words infuriated me. I have been working consistently, not just relying on Robert. It might be time to reveal my truth to my ignorant mother-in-law. I actually earn my income through illustration and web design work. My annual income exceeds $100,000. If that's considered low, then you must be quite remarkable, I stated. At that moment, I could sense my mother-in-law gasping. She probably couldn't have fathomed this. The daughter-in-law she always scorned and assumed to be idle living had an annual income of $100,000. Wait, do you really think I'd fall for such a story? To my still skeptical mother-in-law, I disclosed the name of my company, suggesting she look it up. My sister-in-law, who was listening via speakerphone, seemed to have looked it up and exclaimed in astonishment, "Wait, really? Gina Manning is listed as the CEO. Why did you hide such crucial information?" I wasn't hiding it. From the beginning, they just misunderstood me as unemployed. They looked down on me without knowing that I was supporting their livelihood. I endured 13 years because Robert and Justin were with me. I could have fled, but that would only result in more contempt from the in-laws, adding to the humiliation. So, I silently waited for Robert's return, planning a grand retaliation to end it all once he was back. The strategy was to sign a contract with a temporary residence and move there as soon as Robert's return was confirmed. I could have chosen to directly stop the power supply, but then they would claim that I was enjoying trapping others by holding the financial power. Knowing their nature to make such shameless claims, I decided to turn the tables. They publicly instructed me to stop the payments. Once that scenario was set, I could actually stop the services without being blamed, forcing them to regret their own words. While pondering how to bring about this situation, they provocatively said, "Stop the payment and show us," making things much easier for me than expected. I can't forget Sarah's confident face as she uttered those words. Rather than feeling hurt, I was somewhat looking forward to the upcoming events. When the in-laws realized their mistake, they began to desperately cover it up. So that was the case. We had no idea. You thought of us and didn't say anything. If you had told us about the actual expenses, we would have treated you differently. My anger surged again. What they meant was, if I had been a housewife with no income, their treatment would have been justified. That's unacceptable. Without an apology and making irrelevant excuses to protect their pride, my anger towards my mother-in-law only grew. No need for such excuses. As Sarah suggested, I have stopped all payments. Moreover, I have no intention of returning to you. Robert, Justin, and I will start a new life. I can no longer be within laws that fail to understand, so please handle things on your own from now on. With that, I ended the call. Despite receiving multiple calls from my in-laws, I felt no inclination to respond and blocked them. The constant ringing of the phone ceased, and the silence that followed was immensely liberating. All that was left was to await Robert's return and plan our next steps. I looked forward to that time while enjoying a moment of peace. Finally, the moment arrived, and Robert returned. His skin, darkened from working outdoors, contrasted with his bright white smile, though his eyes were sharp. "Sorry for the long wait." "Let's go," Robert said. I nodded immediately, and we drove towards the in-laws' house. Upon ringing the doorbell, my mother-in-law appeared with a vacant expression. Her skin was rough, her hair unkempt, and her roots were visibly untreated, indicating a long absence from the salon. When I was providing financial support, she lived comfortably, but now, without a job, she depended on her daughter, who was a part-time worker. This was exactly what I had intended. People accustomed to living on someone else's dime don't easily adjust their sense of money. For my in-laws, who had been comfortable for 13 years, this new reality must have been painful. Gradually, my mother-in-law raised her head and looked at us intently. At that moment, it seemed as if a light returned to her eyes as she stared at us. I asked her why she was in such a state. Suddenly, she erupted in anger. "It's all your fault. You kept earning quietly, deceiving us, didn't you? How insolent. Ever since you left, our income stopped and the expenses soared, with me having to take care of father. Sarah is just loafing around, useless. Why do we have such ungrateful children? It's infuriating." She refused to admit her failures, maintaining her stubbornness. Her pride was indeed like a high mountain. As I harbored these thoughts, Robert quickly countered. "Let me return those words to you. It's your belief that serving parents is a child's duty that's wrong." I repeatedly pointed out Sarah's choice to be a part-time worker, didn't I? But every time you and father dismissed it, saying a woman just needs to marry. This led to a person who, even past 40, can secure a stable job and lazes around at home. At Robert's rebuttal, my mother-in-law was speechless, merely trembling and unable to respond. She was skilled at deflecting blame onto others, always scheming how to escape criticism. Seeing my sister-in-law behave this way, it felt like the apple didn't fall far from the tree. The argument at the doorstep lasted a while until my mother-in-law's phone rang. After smacking her lips, she checked the display when her face became pale. The call seemed to be from the police. Sarah was caught dining and dashing and is now in police custody. They want someone to pick her up. What on earth is she doing? Currently, only the parents were home, as my sister-in-law had gone out with a friend. She intended to dine at her friend's expense, who had suggested to meet up after a long time. Unaware of my sister-in-law's part-time work situation, the friend expected to split the bill after the meal, which enraged my sister-in-law. She insisted that the one who suggested to meet up should pay. However, it doesn't work like that. Isn't it a basic responsibility of an adult to pay for what you've consumed? They didn't share their meal. My sister-in-law ordered expensive dishes and premium wines, expecting others to cover the cost. Why should anyone else bear that expense? Despite it being her fault, she feigned ignorance and left the restaurant without paying. Caught by the owner, she was promptly reported to the police. Robert and I could only exchange wry smiles at this terrible outcome. My mother-in-law trembled at the amount my sister-in-law had racked up. Drinking wine worth several hundreds of dollars at an Italian restaurant in the afternoon and the total bill exceeding $400? Unbelievable, we don't have that kind of money. For them, $400 was a significant amount. In response to my mother-in-law's pleading gaze, I smirked and firmly stated, "I won't pay." That single sentence completely defeated her, causing her to crumble to the floor. Upon our arrival at the scene, we discovered that my sister-in-law's acquaintance had temporarily covered the bill, and the police had left. Naturally, this friend was now demanding reimbursement from my mother-in-law for my sister-in-law's share. Although I had anticipated some trouble, my mother-in-law quickly withdrew cash from a nearby ATM and handed it directly to my sister-in-law's acquaintance. While I was surprised at how readily she paid, Robert discreetly shared the background story. That person is the daughter of the owner of the company where our father used to work. Sarah only had a handful of close friends, and if you're talking about a middle school classmate, that would be her. She's quite well known locally, and it seems the decision to comply was influenced by the fear of damaging our family's reputation. Looking at my mother-in-law again, I saw her repeatedly apologizing to my sister-in-law's friend in a pitiful manner. My sister-in-law's acquaintance offered a word of advice and then left, swishing her long hair. It was clear that my mother-in-law's attitude, born out of fear for the family's reputation, might cause my sister-in-law's few remaining friends to distance themselves. My sister-in-law, having been scolded by the shop owner, appeared before us and was shocked to see us. "Why are you here?" she exclaimed, covering her face and starting to cry. Her disheveled appearance, a stark contrast to her past focus on beauty, must have been an embarrassing moment for her. Witnessing my sister-in-law, who once looked down on me, fall so low brought a sense of relief to me. Robert seemed to share this sentiment, giving her a cold look. Overwhelmed by his gaze, my sister-in-law eventually broke down crying, unconcerned with the onlookers. Yet, I felt skeptical about her crying. After all, she had just attempted to evade paying for her meal and then had her mother settle it instead. My sister-in-law had always been conscious of others' opinions, especially about her appearance, spending her income not on the household but on dubious supplements and odd mirrors from shady salons, resulting in wasteful expenses. Ultimately realizing their mistakes, both my mother and sister-in-law apologized and kneeled in front of us. "We're sorry, it was our fault. We won't harass Jean again. Please come back." Their plea was sincere. For my prideful mother-in-law to kneel for an apology, the situation must truly have been dire. However, my sister-in-law stubbornly refused to apologize, maintaining her stance. "I'm not at fault. I won't give in like my mother, so I definitely won't apologize." It was neither I nor Robert who showed anger at these words, but my mother-in-law herself. "I've had enough. Don't ever come back to this house. With this $400, our ties are severed. If you had worked properly or gotten married, this wouldn't have happened." In a fit of rage, my mother-in-law lashed out at my sister-in-law. Having always been pampered, my sister-in-law was stunned to receive such harsh words from her mother, leaving her frozen. The cracks within the family ultimately got exposed, revealing the fragility of their bonds. A family should support each other, but they were too self-centered, always blaming others for their problems. It was a very embarrassing and pitiful end to a ludicrous drama. "Your words are like a boomerang, mother-in-law. If there had been no bullying towards me from the start, it wouldn't have come to this. If you and father had guided Sarah on the right path, this outcome could have been avoided, don't you think? Reality cannot be changed, so you'll just have to accept it." With my statement, both remained silent. Choosing silence was probably wise, as they had nothing to offer but complaints and apologies. Endless hardships await them. I endured it for 13 years, but I couldn't have done it without a supportive family. I can't imagine them living without a strong bond and cooperating with each other in the future. They are doomed to wander in perpetual adversity. The struggles they face may seem minor compared to the pain and humiliation I endured. Hopefully, their future hardships will make them realize their foolishness. My mother-in-law has apparently started a part-time job out of financial necessity. However, past deeds aren't easily undone. My father-in-law fell again. The reason was clear. He continued to consume alcohol despite the doctor's warnings. The result of continuously purchasing cheap alcohol was a deterioration to his health, leading to a long-term hospital stay. As my father-in-law complained about the bland hospital food, my mother-in-law had a myriad of other concerns and was extremely anxious. She had hoped that he would stay at home and rest, given his inability to work due to his leg condition. However, the medical expenses for his surgery and hospitalization heavily burdened the family's finances. Angry, my mother-in-law used up all the savings my father-in-law had hidden. Discovering this, my father-in-law was furious, leading to an argument that ended with scolding from the neighboring patients in the hospital room. My father-in-law is currently leading a quiet hospital life, spending his days feeling deprived of his freedom. My mother-in-law, working tirelessly to cover medical and living expenses, was dedicated to supporting the family. Despite her iron will, enduring it day after day, the accumulated fatigue led to her collapsing from overwork, ironically resulting in her being hospitalized too. Occasionally, there are requests for visits from her grandson, but it's hard to imagine Justin genuinely loving a grandmother who has continuously harassed his mother since he was little. Therefore, Justin chose to cut off relations with his grandmother, a decision that deeply wounded my mother-in-law, knocking her out completely. As for my sister-in-law, after being expelled from the house, her life grew even more challenging. She was caught stealing money at her part-time job, leading to her arrest. Far from showing remorse, she defiantly claimed, "I stole because I needed the money," leading to further problems. The amount she stole was substantial, and her repeated offenses came to light, ultimately resulting in a prison sentence. We couldn't help but offer a wry smile at this typical ending for my sister-in-law, hoping that one day she would regret her actions. Our family has purchased a high-rise apartment and started a new life. Even with our affluence, we strive to live humbly and peacefully, learning from the mistakes of my in-laws and avoiding being arrogant. While I'm not good at physical activities, my son Justin shows remarkable talent in fencing, competing in national tournaments and attending a prestigious school for it, enjoying a fulfilling high school life. Someday, I might find myself in my mother-in-law's position when Justin brings home a bride. When that time comes, I aspire to be a kind and supportive mother-in-law, never interfering unnecessarily but always ready to offer needed help, holding this as my